afternoon, everybody. Are you awake? Yes. This is sometimes referred to, the mid-afternoon slot is sometimes referred to for speakers as the graveyard slot. So if you need to wake up, to shake up, to breathe deeply, please do that, but not on my time, on your time. I got 15 minutes, 14 and a half now. Now, what I want to say is that a lot of what I have in my presentation has already been covered, and I'm very, very happy about that. What that allows me to do is to flip through quickly quite a bit of the content, but to dwell on a few main points that I think are important. So I want to start with this Chinese proverb, which is saying that there are many roads to the mountaintop, many paths to the top of the mountain, but the view is always the same. And that's really the working premise that my colleagues and I in the Mental Wellness Initiative, some of whom are here, have worked on in creating our white paper on mental wellness. One of the points I really want to emphasize to you is that more and more research is showing that brain growth in adulthood happens. Not stops, not shrinks, but can be facilitated. I want to ask you to really latch on to that point. The term for this is neuroplasticity. Lawrence, are you here? Lawrence Choi, Dr. Lawrence Choi? He was here earlier. Dr. Lawrence Choi has written, he's a neuropsychiatrist, he's written a section on brain plasticity in our white paper. And basically, the point is that by activating the brain through a number of different strategies, we enable it to fire in different ways, to create new pathways, and to actually grow new white matter, new subcortical neurons, and new gray matter, the cortex, throughout the adult lifespan. Hang on to that idea. It's not very familiar. You all know René Descartes' concept, his wrestle with an existential reality. How do I know I exist? And his answer was, cogito, I think, therefore I am. Well, I think a new paradigm has a few different assumptions in it. One is, I am. Then I think. And this is a grand Latin way of saying I go beyond. Ego supergradiatur. Or you could say, ego transcendo. I can transcend, I go beyond. That is a different 21st century and 21st century before our era conceptualization of humanity. This is the white paper, which from this talk now is downloadable from the website of the Mental Wellness Initiative. We have had a few copies printed for the media and the board members of the GWI, and I'd like to thank the John W. Brick Foundation for Mental Health for their support in that. This is the team that worked on the white paper. It's a team of extraordinary richness in experience. Public health people, Dr. Guerra has contributed. Many of the contributors are here in the audience now. This is some of the material that's already been covered. I'm not going to dwell on it, but essentially nutrition is critical in enhancing mental well-being. And I want you to look at this slide. Have you ever heard this term, nutritional psychiatry? I doubt it. When I first saw it going through the literature, I could hardly believe my eyes that psychiatry had turned to nutrition, but it has. There's a whole branch and there's a journal of nutritional psychiatry. In other words, using nutrition as a way of dealing with mental health issues. You see the point there, traditional whole food diet, consisting of all of those, is more likely to provide the nutrients that afford resiliency against the pathogenesis of mental disorders. They're saying, don't talk to us about mental illness until you get the diet right. Get this kind of diet going. What sort of diet does that look like to you? Mediterranean, of course. I knew you would say that. Now, I want to tell you, Japan, we heard about 300 centenarians in Sardinia this morning. Japan has 67,000 people aged 100 or more. And I want to tell you, not one of them has ever eaten the Mediterranean diet. How did they do it? That's the question. The Mediterranean diet is a Western diet studied by Westerners, on Westerners, and recommended for the 75% of the world's population that is not Western. It's not about the Mediterranean diet, and it's not about the Japanese diet. It's about these fundamental principles that you see here that Dan Buettner also brought about. And I think we should be careful to avoid locking into cultural typings of diets, because it creates a sense of cultural hegemony, of influence on other cultures, when there are fundamental nutritional principles that are more underlying and important. One of the things we've discovered as we've worked on the mental wellness initiative is that there's a connection between the gut and the brain. In the past, we always heard about the blood-brain barrier. Now we're hearing about the gut-brain axis. So what happens in your gut, the bacteria, the health of your microbiome, affects your brain. And this opens us really to a range of strategies for intervention that we hadn't thought of before. And probiotics and what are now being called psychobiotics is a whole emerging field. There's this new book, The Psychobiotic Revolution, which goes specifically into the role of probiotics in managing mental health and wellness issues. So that's nutrition. There are mental approaches. Cognitive activities, we know, this is keeping the brain working. Use it or lose it is the principle. And cognitive activities, keeping the mind active throughout aging, of course, is a key factor in keeping cognitive abilities there. But it's not all going out, thinking and exercising out. It turns out that going in actually is a profoundly transformative influence on brain activity. You see all the effects: mental health maintenance, improvement of memory, empathy, and sense of self. Now, we've got evidence to back all of these claims. The white paper has presented evidence for all of this. What we wanted to do was not just map pathways, but present evidence for pathways that all lead in different ways to the top of the mountain, that is, to mental wellness. There's over 19,000 studies done now on meditation. The first was done by Dr. Robert Keith Wallace in 1970 from UCLA, and then from Harvard Medical School when he went as a postdoc there. And he looked at transcendental meditation and found that there was a very different physiological state that existed in meditation. Now, 19,000 studies on, it's fully accepted, and Bob Roth will be talking about this, the huge range of effects of meditation in enhancing mental well-being. This is a study from research on the transcendental meditation technique, and if you look at the pattern on the left, that's ordinary rest, and you look at the brain mapping during meditation, you can see there's some very intense activity in the prefrontal areas of the brain, showing that sitting with eyes closed in rest and sitting with eyes closed in meditation are very, very different neurophysiological processes. Sleep is obviously extremely important for mental well-being, and good night's sleep, regular exercise, exercising late in the day actually is in conflict with the body's biorhythms. The body's wanting to wind down. So if you go for a workout after work, your body's wanting to wind down then. Sometimes we have no choice, but it's not the best time. So understanding the body's rhythms will help also enable sleep through appropriate and appropriately timed exercise. Here's one that's really interesting, laughter. There's a whole field of yoga laughter. And you have these guys standing up like I'm up here, and they go ha 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 ha, and you go ha 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 ha. And then suddenly we're all laughing at each other, and we're actually not laughing about anything, but we're laughing together. It turns out that that has, as you see up there, colleagues of mine at Oxford have found that there are actual brain effects of that, and this transforms the physiology of stress to the physiology of happiness and release. It's also a wonderful way of affecting and enhancing mood for older people with early stage of cognitive decline, because you don't have to tell them a joke that they may not get. There's no joke. It's just laughing. Of course, there are many physical approaches. We've heard a lot about exercise and mood, and this has a huge effect on mental well-being. This is a very interesting area that dance, as it turns out, has the same effect as other forms of exercise on the motor areas of the brain, but unlike any other form of exercise, and there have been studies on this, it also enhances and increases activity and grey and white matter growth in the meaning areas of the brain, in the prefrontal areas of the cortex. Why? As a species, we have danced in the history of our evolution. We've danced around campfires. We've danced to invoke the spirits of our ancestors, to invoke the spirits of animals we're going to hunt, of the seasons, bringing them on, and so on. And we've danced in a group, and it turns out that social dance has an effect on activating the communication areas in the brain, so much so that there are improvements in people with dementia when they dance. This is also found with Parkinson's disease. There's a whole movement now called Dance for PD, for Parkinson's disease, where you see there's an improvement in overall movement, a 26% improvement in walking or gait, not the freezing that happens in Parkinson's, and an almost 20% reduction in tremor from dancing. No drugs. Yoga, of course, you can start as young as you like in yoga, and you can see it has an effect on cardiovascular disease, anxiety, depression, and so on. Tai Chi not only balances mind-body connection, reduces anxiety, but for the elderly, and this is important, older people, it's been found in studies and studies of studies, meta-analyses, to be the best means of preventing falling in the elderly. Because the point about Tai Chi is that as you move, you're correcting out of a fall, like that. So it's creating a sense of balance on the move, and when people start to fall, they've already entrained in themselves the means of correcting out of a fall. This is a very important one, being in nature. This is well known to Japanese and our Japanese friends in the community here today. It's called Shirin-yoku in Japanese. Excuse my pronunciation, Maru. And the idea of being in nature, from where our species has come, as restorative, is deeply part of Japanese culture, and it turns out in research that there's an improvement in blood pressure, reduction in levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and so on, all resulting from being in nature. It seems so obvious, but people who live near parks with trees have better mental health than people who live near parks that have no trees. This is research from Australia. Massage, there's a huge amount of research on this. It's telling me I'm out of time. I want to just reference again the Japanese concept of ikigai that Dan Buettner was talking about. Not just to say there's this sense of purpose, but there's a sense of policy about this too. Arrivederci.